Okay, well, welcome to the next episode in our So You Want to Be a Consultant webinar. And we're excited today to have Constance Dierickx with us, talking about tips from the top, secrets to building a successful consulting practice. And there's a reason we have Constance here, because she has been an exemplar of how you build a successful practice. And that's not only in terms of having a great amount of revenue, but also life balance and having the less labor intensity and having the life that you want and being successful. So Constance helps boards and senior executives in crisis, when the stakes are high, when leaders believe their business is ossified and they need to shift before changes are forced upon them. Her M&A clients succeed 400% more often than the average, which is pretty darn good. And her CEO transition clients retain over 95% of executive talent who is not selected for the top job. And 98% of board CEO conflicts are successfully resolved. So there's somebody out there that wasn't paying attention. But Constance is also the winner of our 2021 Corey Shanahan Memorial Advancing Consulting Award for Consultant of the Year. So that's why she's here to share her thoughts with us. And here's what we're doing. You all are muted and we can't see you. If you have a question, please put it either in the chat or the Q&A. And Lisa and I will monitor the chat and the Q&A, and we will get that to Constance. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Constance.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Lisa, for inviting me to do this talk, which I will turn into a conversation with your help, which is always a lot more fun. So the series is about why you want to be a consultant. I'll tell you some of my reasons that I wanted to be a consultant. One was I wanted freedom. I had been in a consulting firm for 12 years and I was feeling kind of squashed. I felt like there was a ceiling on my revenue. So reason number two to be a consultant on your own or in a small boutique firm is there's really no limit on the amount of money you can earn. The third reason is that you can decide yourself what your approach is, what your brand is, how you're going to reach buyers. And you don't have to have committee meetings, and it doesn't take 18 months. It's literally possible when you're a solo consultant or in a small firm to decide one day to change something and pivot and do it literally the next day. We have examples of that in the community that people that many of you know that are very fast and very facile at applying good advice that they get from their peers here in the SAC community. So other than the fact that you can make more money, have more independence, reduce your labor intensity, and have a lot of control, I mean, that's reason enough for me. And those were my reasons. And those are the reasons I hear from a lot of people who get in touch with me and say, can we talk? I want to know more about this consulting business and how I approach that. So I'm very excited to share that with you today. But before I go on, I'd like to know at what stage each of you are in your consulting journey. So if you'll type into the chat either the word new or the word experienced or the word expert, and let me know where you are in that range.
Constance, I'm going to ask you, how do you define experience versus expert? So
experienced is somebody that has been a consultant for a while, but is still at a point where they're actively having to learn a lot about the process of consulting. They may be an expert content-wise, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, that the difference between being a content expert and a process expert is literally millions of dollars in revenue. I should have said that, but thanks for asking. That was really good.
Okay, so it looks like so far what we're seeing is people are experienced.
Good.
Maybe they're a little afraid to say they might be experts, because I look at some of the folks who say they're experienced and I think they're kind of expert in some things. But what that probably means is that, that they're want to hear how they get from being experienced to expert.
Yeah, absolutely right. And you're right. Experienced is a safer word. It sounds a little less haughty, if you will. So, but I say expert because an expert consultant is able to meet a new prospective client and get to know them and pivot, learn quickly and apply what they're learning about the client situation and bring that into the conversation in a way that guides your potential buyer into your stream, into the river where you can help them. Now that is not always possible. Sometimes you meet someone, you have a conversation, and they need something, like somebody that needs supply chain help, for example. I need to give them Lisa Anderson's contact information. She's the expert in that. I am not. It doesn't mean I can't inquire about it, though, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. You know, marketing, that's an evergreen need that organizations have. Linda Popke is an expert in marketing. I'm pretty darn good at marketing solo consulting firms, as I've done for myself and some of my individual clients that I've helped, including a woman that started working with me a year ago and doubled her revenue last year, more than doubled her revenue last year, and told me that she's still too afraid to ask for the fees I'm recommending. She's not even asking for the fees that I'm telling her she should ask for, and she still is doing fabulously well. But every time she sends a letter of agreement with a higher fee on it, she sends me an email and she goes, that made me weak in the knees. I'm still scared. Sometimes I'm scared, you know, that's okay. So if you want to be a consultant.
Don says millions of dollars difference is the big distinction between experienced and expert.
Yeah. I mean, that is literally true. When I left my consulting firm, 3 years after I left my firm, I was making more than 3 times as much money as I was before. And I was one of the highest paid people in the firm. And one reason I left was it occurred to me that there was a cap, that I was never going to be allowed to make more than the CEO. And I don't know about all of you, but if I'm working with a smaller company, it's fairly common that I earn more than the CEO, like, you know, but they don't know that. And I don't tell them. I think that would be kind of rude. But it literally is the case that it can be millions of dollars in difference. And so, you know, the question you might be thinking is, well, how do you do that? And we are going to get to that. So I wanted to just quickly go over, and if you want to stop and dig into any of these things, please do. I just want to make sure I'm not digging into things where you feel like, oh yeah, I've heard that. You know, I've heard enough of that, Constance. Could you move on, please? Let's make this about what you need to talk about, as well as what I feel is essential to share. So what do you need to succeed? We hear people talk about value proposition. I don't know about you, but I know some consultants who shall remain nameless who are chewing on their value proposition for literally years. You gotta get to it faster than that. And sometimes you need help. Sometimes you need a coach or a mentor or something like that to get your value proposition down so that you can start using it. Now, I will tell you that I've changed mine a couple times in the years since I've been on my own, which is now 12 years. It's hard to believe. I've changed it. I've tweaked it, but I have never stopped prospecting and marketing and meeting with prospective buyers while I was chewing on my value proposition. So sitting in your office, chewing on your pencil, you know, and saying, I can't do anything until I do that is completely wrong. At the same time, you need to have something. So I have a question for you that I don't hear others ask very often. And some of my individual clients have told me this is a helpful question. So here's the question. What value do people derive from you being in the mix that they don't have if you're not in the mix? It's a value proposition question, but it's a little bit tilted from the way you might have thought about it before. So the reason I came up with this question was because my clients started telling me, and of course, in the beginning, I was a little dense and I didn't start listening soon enough. I was like, oh yeah. When your clients tell you why you're great, please listen, write it down, deconstruct how you're doing that. I didn't do that soon enough. That was one of my many mistakes I've made. But my clients tell me that they make better decisions, they make faster decisions, They see things about their company or the people in the company that they didn't realize. They see things differently, and they're able to come up with more and better options when I'm part of a conversation than when I'm not. That's pretty darn good. I'll take that. One client put a very fine point on it. He said, "You know what you are?" And I thought, uh-oh. Like many of you, you hear that and you think, "Ooh, what's coming?" He said, "You're the decision doctor." Luckily for me, I had started listening to my clients a little bit more closely, and I trademarked that phrase. And yes, I really am a doctor. So, it's not just a moniker. I actually have the credential. And it's
Constance,
funny because
can you
people
repeat
notice
the
that.
question one more time? Because that's such a valuable question. I'm not sure everybody got it. I want to make sure everybody gets it.
Okay. Yeah. If you want it, you could even type it in the chat if you want. I'll
Okay.
say it slower. What value do people derive? See, I'm looking down at my notes.
That's fine.
What value do people derive when you are in the mix that they don't have when you're not? In other words, when you're there, what turns out better? What's better about the process that isn't when you're not there? I mean, often I'm working with people that are stuck, like a board of directors that's stuck, and I unstick them. Well, I don't want to go around and saying, "Hey, I'm the executive unsticker." That's silly. But the answer to that question, and if you're listening closely, your clients will tell you, they'll give you clues to what that is. But don't stop doing what you're doing until you have that perfect description. If you sit next to me on a plane and you say, "Hey, what do you do?" I say, "I advise boards and senior executives on high stakes decisions and in crisis." And then I shut my mouth and wait, because they'll usually say something like, "Oh, for who? And how do you do that?" And they'll ask me something, and then I can ask them a question and we can have a conversation, unless they're annoying, in which case I bury my head in my laptop. You all know the drill. But anyway, I'm not on planes much anymore. So, so that's, to me, it is the first essential ingredient in building your practice, whether you're a new consultant, intermediate, and if you're an expert, you can always reflect back on that and say, "Is that right? Is that what I want it to be now? I told you I've shifted mine." And it's fine to do. Nobody's ever said to me, "Oh, by the way, you used to say this and now you say that. What's up?" No, they're not thinking about us perhaps as much as we think they are. The second thing you need is you need content. You need really good content. But when you're delivering content, you have to tie your content to something that makes it relevant to your ideal client, which brings me to ideal client. It's good to have an image of your ideal client. Now, I have an image in my head of an ideal client. I also have images in my head of bad clients, and they actually, the bad clients are more clear to me. They actually remind me of someone in my past. It works for me. And the reason I'm saying this is that it's just as important to recognize early that something is not a good opportunity for you and to back away from it. Because when you stay and you try and you try and you try and you try, I've done it. I can tell you I've done it. When it eventually hits the skids, it leaves you feeling a lot more depleted than when you turn down the party before they told you you weren't invited. So who is your ideal client is essential. And when you're writing content or preparing content in some form, maybe you're going to shoot some videos and post them, visualize in your mind's eye that ideal client in front of you. I'm being very literal here. You want an image of a C-suite executive or whoever your ideal client is, and you want to imagine what they're wrestling with. And we could talk about that some more as well. It's very important when you post, like on LinkedIn, that you are delivering valuable content. Now, a lot of consultants will say to me, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to give away the farm." And I don't. Well, you're not going to give them chapter and verse. You're going to give them conceptual headings and maybe an example within each one. This is something I learned from Dory Clark. When you write an article and you say, what are the top 3 ways that executives can stem the tide of the Great Resignation, for example, you say 1, 2, 3, and you give the headline, a 1-sentence description, and you give an example. Now, the great thing about being a consultant is that there's so much we can do to help people move in the right direction faster when we're there than when we're not. And some people reading your content will say, I got to call Linda Popke like right now. Or I think I saw Dan's name on this. Did I, Linda, Dan Janelle? I got to call Dan Janelle. I get me that guy, or, you know, Lisa, get me, I got to get on Lisa's mailing list. And that's what you want. Not because you didn't deliver value, but because they know if you know that, you probably know a lot more. The second thing you need is you need an audience for your content. This sounds so obvious, but I will confess to you, this is the part of the formula that I neglected for too long. Now, because of the business I do, that comes through referrals from board members and senior executives, I haven't needed to have a big list. But when I wrote my first book and tried to sell it, I realized, like, ruh-roh, how am I going to market this book? Because I always thought in my head, I'm not in the retail business. And then when I wrote the book, I went, oh, there's a piece of my business that is in the retail business. Now, I didn't write a book to sell books, but I wrote a book to enhance my brand. But if nobody reads it, it actually sold okay. I was kind of surprised by that, but I could see the mistake that I had made. So how do you grow your network? You grow your network with good content that has value. And whatever lane you're swimming in, you can define that. And what I've discovered over the years is you can define layers within that stream. So right now, for example, I'm working on something that's going to go on my website that's going to be for consultants. I've never done this before. I've always been talking to, you know, a board member or a CEO or somebody who could become a CEO. And so I've had to make that shift, and it's actually kind of fun. You don't have to do that, but what I'm saying to you is it's so much better if you'll make those decisions deliberately rather than by default. So we've talked about, excuse me, 1 second. Okay, so we've talked about content and growing your network. Another thing that is essential, the fourth thing, so you need to know what your value is, you need content, and you need a network. And the fourth thing is you need social proof. What I see some consultants do is they try to go after social proof before they have content. And they try to go after social proof without a relationship. So if you read Dan Pink's newest book, Regret, which I just read, I love Dan. He's not only such a wonderful researcher and writer, he majored in linguistics, by the way, which I didn't know until recently. But if you read that, where was I going with that? So you read Dan's book and you're like, I like this Dan Pink guy. I'm writing a book. Maybe he'll endorse it. You have no connection to Dan Pink. You just, you know, sometimes I'm surprised at people. I literally got a LinkedIn message yesterday from a woman who saw me speak last week. And she said, I'm looking for a mentor. I'm getting my coaching certification. And will you be my, will you do this? And I'm like, what? What? So I'm going to have a call with her. I scheduled it for 20 minutes. I want to be polite, but it's like, wow, you're asking for something really big and we don't know each other. I don't know if I would even be the right person. I don't know yet if that's something I'd be willing to do. Social proof is when someone else says you're great, and they will often say why you're great. As you are building your network, one of the easy ways to get those people that are more well-known than you are, and maybe you are already well-known. Maybe you're a lot more well-known than I am, and good for you if that's the case. But the way that I've been successful in building a network is I'll see something that someone wrote. Maybe it's a book or maybe it's something else. And I reach out to them and I say, I write for Forbes and Harvard Business Review. If you don't, it's okay. Just say, I'm writing an article about, tell them what it has to do with them, tell them why you like what they did, and ask if they'd be willing to have an interview with you on Zoom for 30 minutes. That some of them won't answer you, sniff, sniff. Some of them will say no, and some of them will say yes. My second most viewed article on Forbes is one I did about Frances Frye, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. I wrote this article. I was extremely careful about it. I edited like crazy. I did not ask Linda for help, though perhaps I should have, because Linda's such a good editor. But I published it. I sent her the link, and she wrote me back 15 minutes later and said, "This is so beautiful. I'm so touched. I sent it to my mother." And I was like, whoa, hit. And it's been viewed, I don't know, 18, 19,000 times, something like that, which is a lot for me. Maybe that's not a big number. For some people, that's not a lot, but for me, it's a lot. So now that gives me a reason to stay in touch with Frances Frye and to let her know that I'm writing my next book. And, it's my lead in. And she speaks well of me. Not in public yet, but we're working on that. If you want to know more about social proof, the term was coined by Robert Cialdini, a former professor at Arizona State. And if you look on Wikipedia, you can find out more about him and his book. The book I like of his that's the best is called Influence. I think it's absolutely essential reading for all of us. And Dan Pink went to Northwestern. Yes, he did, Dan. And then he went to law school, but he never practiced law. So I want to come back to, I mentioned the Great Resignation, I mentioned supply chain, and that was in the context of relevance. When you are either writing content or when you're in a conversation with a potential buyer, a prospective client, it's not enough to know what's going on in the world. It's not enough to know that we have supply chain issues. I mean, who doesn't know that? It's not enough to know that marketing is an evergreen topic or that there's a great resignation. You have to tie it to the person you're talking to in a way that feels relevant for them. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, the currency in Argentina was, well, the currency in Argentina, I don't think has ever been particularly stable, but at the point in time where I was about to meet with the president of the Latin American business for Gillette, it was Gillette at the time, they were bought by P&G a few years ago. But I was about to meet with this guy and I thought, I wonder what his environment is like. And I knew that the sales were down in his region, and I knew that they were horribly bad in Argentina. So when I met with him, I said to him, so tell me how your business is going. And he put his head in his hands and he's like, oh God, I think I'm going to get fired. And, and this super talented guy, he did not get fired, but he said, sales are down and revenue's down and, the margins are tough. And I said to him, how much of that has to do with the devaluation of the currency in Argentina? And he looked at me, his mouth almost open, not quite, metaphorically it opened. He was it was the 2 seconds of stunned silence that Alan Weiss talks about that you want to get. And the business that I was there to talk about became my second project with them. And my first project was $180,000. And the second project was about the same size. What I did was I turned something that I knew that was in the news into a relevance to him. I'll give you another example. I'm working with a CFO right now of a public company He will be the next CEO. Very smart guy, absolutely marvelous pedigree in his background, has worked for some big consumer products companies. And we were talking about their recent analyst call, which I always, when you're working with a public company, it's a great idea to listen to the analyst calls. I find it kind of fun, and they're not super long. And so I was listening to the analyst call, and I was meeting with him the same day. So call in the morning, meeting in the afternoon. And I said to him, I said, I heard on the analyst call, supply chain, cash. I heard all these things, but what is really behind your stock price not rising, even though your fundamentals are improving? And he said, margin. And I said, okay. I said, does it have anything to do with supply chain? And he goes, yes and no. Anyway, we got in this conversation. Now, I'm not somebody who's just showing up and talking about whether or not he's an introvert, because I don't really care. But too often what I learn from people that I coach and mentor is that they go in to have a conversation with someone and they're leaning too much on their content expertise and not enough on their process expertise. But you don't get good process expertise if you're not paying attention to what's happening around you, and you have yet to develop the ability to be what I call, well, I didn't call it this, I think it was Carl Rogers who coined this phrase, a participant observer. I would say, and I held this back, Linda, earlier when we talked about expert and experienced. I was sandbagging. An expert consultant is someone who has the ability to be in a conversation and simultaneously observe the conversation that's happening so that they see the process that's going on, that you can sense when your client is not literally, but psychologically, cognitively, and emotionally, they're backing up. Now, you don't know why they're backing up. The danger here is that you will decide why they're backing up, but you really don't know yet. Having the skill of observing these kind of process things is absolutely priceless in being an expert consultant. So that's one of the ways that I would say is different. So, excuse me once again, I got a really runny nose. I'm just going to tell y'all. I'm in Atlanta, so I get to say y'all, but it's quite annoying, and I don't want it to be annoying to you. So I'm just going to, step aside when that happens. So do we have any questions, Linda? Seems like a good time. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
I don't see any right now. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. Lisa, any questions on your side?
Well, so it sounds like you're basically saying that we should bring like the news and world events and I guess plays and other like bring a total picture into the equation, and that's one of the ways if you can relate it to what's going on with your client in some meaningful way. That's right. One way to move up that ladder, if you will, from
it is a
beginner to expert.
Yeah, it's a huge way. I would say that when I was doing the work at Gillette, I was at my old firm, and it was a way that I went from being one of, I don't know, there were 20 consultants on this project all over the world. Like, we went everywhere. Yep. Some of the places were fun, some were not, but it was one of the ways, and maybe the most important way, that I became distinct among this group of consultants, all of whom, like myself, are psychologists. And, the danger of having so much education in a particular field or so much knowledge and experience is sometimes we show up and throw up on people. It's like, well, there's some underlying conflict, and that's, I don't know, it's probably transference. Like, that stuff's in my head, but I don't talk like that. I use my knowledge as a psychologist to understand, But you're right, Lisa, you have to connect what's happening in the outside world. One of the things that communicates to the leader that you're talking to is empathy. You're communicating empathy. You're saying, I noticed this happening in the world. I was thinking about the effect that that's probably having on you, but you're asking questions rather than telling them what the effect is. Like if I had walked in and said, oh, I guess the margin problem is due to the supply chain. That's kind of a smart aleck thing to say. And, leaders and people in general have a funny way of not liking that.
Yeah, no, that makes really good sense. And to some degree, it's how you phrase that question.
So Constance, we have a question from Stephen. How long do you think it took you as a consultant to make the leap from experience to expert? And what can you point to that was the tipping point or the pivot point to help you make that jump?
Let's see. I would say it took me a while, probably 10 years, I guess. No. Let me just segment my experience. I was 12 years in a consulting firm. I became a partner. My learning was stymied during that time. I was reading Alan Weiss's books. I hired him to be my mentor, but didn't tell anybody what I was doing. But I wasn't able to apply what I was learning because the firm wouldn't allow it. So I think I was stymied, and I stayed in that job too long. I stayed about 3 years too long. One of my many mistakes, and I'm happy to share those with you. But I would say once I left, it probably took me maybe about 3 or 4 more years. The tipping point, I don't know that there was a specific point, but I can tell you what I did that led up to it. I invested a lot of money in my own development. I met Lisa Anderson in a workshop. That's how I know her. Linda, I can't remember when you and I met. I feel like we've always known each other.
Yeah.
But I think, I know, we met at a workshop in Boston.
We did. That's right. Yeah.
And Lisa and I met at a workshop in Rhode Island. And I
remember that.
I was spending a lot. Yeah, I sat next to you at dinner. I can actually remember what we both ate because.
Oh my goodness, that's impressive. I could guess.
Well, I mean, food is my first love. So I mean,
I hope it was good.
Can we talk about food? No, we can't talk about food now. But I tend to remember those scenarios. But I was investing heavily. I was investing so heavily that my accountant was kind of alarmed at how much money I was spending, tens of thousands of dollars. And I would say that after about 3 or 4 years of being out on my own, I was beginning to feel like an expert. And now I feel expert. Not every minute of every day. There's sometimes things happen and I just go, what? So it's expert doesn't mean mistake-free, flawless. It's just, I trust myself so much now. I scare myself sometimes. It's like, yeah, I can do that. Part of the reason that I've gotten to that point, and maybe this is part of my tipping point to respond to your question, is I got a lot better and faster at saying no. So I don't want to go and try to do a piece of work because there's possible revenue there. If it means I have to, I don't know, go to some workshop and get certified in some invalid, stupid personality test. I mean, I already have access to the best stuff. I don't need to do that. And it annoys me. And I figure if I'm annoyed, I might annoy my potential client. So I have gotten more and more rapid and sure and decisive about saying no. I think I'm coaching a woman right now, the woman I told you that doubled her revenue. I just have to keep telling her, you got to walk away from that. Oh, I got this RFP. Should I respond? And I want to be like we've talked about, no, Do you know the person that was in charge of crafting the RFP? Did you have input into it? Is it written so that you're the sole source? No, no, no. Okay, then throw it in the garbage. And so I encourage all of you to work on being very brave about saying no, walking away. The other thing I think to be brave about, and I did this about a year and a half ago, I fired a client, a board of directors that I was working with, and I had a $150,000 letter of agreement on the table. I'd already written it. And they did something that was so unethical and so egregious and so frankly stupid that I just called up the board chair and I said, I can work as hard as it's possible for me to work, and I can do everything I know to do to help you. But until you as a board deal with that issue, and I'll tell you what it was, as a board member who comes to board meetings drunk and who's been known to get handsy with female executives in the company. There's nothing I can do about that. They need to remove him and they won't do it. They still haven't done it. I talked to them last week. But I walked away from that and the relief I felt was so incredible. Now, if you're brand new, and I don't think anyone on here is a brand new consultant, if you're brand new and you need to put food on the table, by all means, ignore my advice for now, but try to remember it for later. I mean, when I started, I was scared I was going to flop. And I started doing, the first check I got was for $3,500. And I ran to the bank and opened my business account. And I thought, maybe this will work. $3,500, that's hilarious. It's hilarious. But I let myself feel some joy about that. And I think that's important too, is to take stock of the causes of your success, share them with your friends and celebrate. Equally important as to share with your friends when you stub your toe, you make a mistake. My first book, High Stakes Leadership, has an egregious error in it. It's bad. It's an error of fact. It is not like a typo. And I know how it happened. It was a lot of back and forth in the editing process. And I called my good friend, Linda Henman. I was literally weeping. And I said, this is a mistake. And she said, don't worry, there's more. Like, thanks a lot, dude. I mean, so there's always mistakes. And I learned from that. In fact, Dan Pink's new book, Regret, is a wonderful way to look at our mistakes and as learning experiences. I don't know about you, but I wasn't born knowing how to be a consultant. I wasn't born knowing as much about human behavior as I know now. I'm still learning. And if it's not okay for us to learn and share when we make mistakes so that we can learn, I don't know. I don't want to be part of that.
So that leads us into a question from Matt. Matt says he was a full-time employee before becoming a consultant, and he doesn't know all the methodologies that consulting firms use to train their consultants to do.
Good.
So he's starting out fresh. He doesn't have all this baggage. What do you advise for him to develop and build a good engagement process?
I would say, first of all, stop thinking about it as an engagement process. That's consultant firm language. That's like, and by the way, a lot of those big firms that are in our heads they have a handful of consultants and 100,000 contractors. Now, I'm not saying the contractors are stupid. They're not. They're usually very smart people, but they're doing stuff. They're analyzing, they're doing research. And their business model is based on billable hours. It's a very different thing than what I do and what I hope you will do, Matt. So in order for you to build up, to get your muscles on how do you land clients, how do you scope out a project, the steps are, first of all, who your ideal client is. Second of all, you figure out who some of those people are and how to get to them. Now, some of them it'll be, you can ask to be introduced. Some of them it'll be more circuitous, but you want to get to them. you want to have a conversation with them. And at the very start of this, I want you to just don't even think about projects, methodology, and money. Your only job in the beginning is to build rapport and trust. That's it. And we don't build rapport and trust when we start talking about, oh, I heard this the other day from somebody. I think I didn't roll my eyes, but I wanted to. I do neuroscience coaching. Yeah, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't. If you're using the phrase lizard brain, like you don't really know what you're talking about. But so you don't need to know all that. You need the skills to have a conversation, to uncover a need. And later you can get better at guiding the conversation so that you're getting them in your stream, like what you're really great at, where you can add value. But if they share with you things that aren't in your bailiwick, that's a good sign. They're sharing with you. That is a sign that you're building rapport and trust. Once you do that and you have illuminated a need, then you start moving into the questions about why is it important to meet that need? What is the value? Getting them to articulate some quantitative measures of that, because that's all going to go in your letter of agreement. I must tell you that one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career, and I see this in people I work with, is they race from, hi, Mr. Smith, nice to meet you, to in their head, they're writing a proposal. And then if they are familiar with the letter of agreement model, which I think many of you probably are, and if you're not, you can read Alan Weiss's books. I can't improve on that process. So I just, to me, Alan is a shortcut. Like if you learn from him, it's a shortcut to success. And you write the letter of agreement where you have objectives, the measures of success. How will we know how it's going? And then who cares? And why is it valuable? And then you're ready to put a fee on it. In the beginning, if you have that consultant firm model in your head, which is time-based, a mistake that we all make when we're new, I think, well, I don't know, I made this mistake and I see other people make it, is we think that the more we're on site or the more contact that we have with people, the more valuable we are. That is not true. In fact, scarcity is part of influence. My letters of agreement to senior executives say, you will have unlimited access to me for the duration of this engagement by phone or email. And when I tell people that, they're like, how can you do that? Like, aren't you too busy? And I'm like, they don't call me. You kidding me? They're busy. They're not sitting in their office going, what could I talk to Constance about today? They're not. They're thinking about their business. Now, there will be episodic periods where, it goes like this. And then like my CFO of a public company, we had a flurry about a month ago where we talked every day for 4 days, and it was the board is doing this and the blah, blah, and the blah, I gave him advice. He used my advice. It all got better. He thinks I'm miraculous, and off we go now. And then I didn't talk to him probably for a month. So getting away from that notion that your value is predicated on your presence is really important, because if you don't do that, your labor intensity is going to be too high, and you might make a lot of money, but you'll be exhausted. Your family will hate you and, or not recognize you. And, bad things will happen. That was
Very
a
true.
lot. That was a lot. I mean, it was like, could I talk to Matt for another 30 minutes?
Well, we do have another question, and it will take us in another direction from Maynard. He's asking, as a consultant, we give advice, but do you have an opinion on giving advice as an executive coach? Or, I would add to this question, is there a difference between how you perform as a coach versus a consultant in terms of advice?
I think, I don't do coaching. And now, do I really coach people? Yeah. Do I ever call it that? No, never. I don't ever call it that, because I don't know what's in the other person's head when they say coaching. But the distinction for me, if I have to make one, is as an advisor, I'm there to give advice. Now, does that mean I have to give advice in every conversation? No. Sometimes I'm simply listening, which I'm really good at being quiet, which is hard for you to believe because you're hearing me talk so much right now, but I'm really good at being quiet. Sometimes that's all I'm doing because they're hearing themselves and they'll say, you know, now that I'm telling you this, I realize that. Boom. You know, that's secret sauce. But coaching, I think, is a more discreet, as I understand it from a lot of coaches I know, it's very circumscribed. We're going to work on these things. And so advice, I think you can give advice, but maybe not as often and maybe not on as big of a stage. Maybe you're not giving advice more broadly and more contextualized, if you will. That's how I see it. And in fact, when I was giving this speech last week, I got criticized, not criticized, but I got pushback because I was talking about how important it is to understand the context that the executive is in, or the manager, whoever you're working with. And I got pushback and someone said, well, that's not coaching. And I'm like, to me, if it's not relevant to the overall picture, I'm out. I don't want to do that. But I think coaching can be defined more discreetly, like I'm going to help you get better at something. And that's perfectly legitimate.
Yep.
Does that help?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Well, Maynard, if you tell us if you think so, or go ahead, Linda.
I was going to say, we have one more question from Dan. When you're doing the initial diagnosis, how do you build trust if you're not sharing ideas and solutions to the problems? What would you do in that initial call to get them to trust you?
I'm going to read this because I didn't,
Okay.
I wasn't able to grok it that first time around. If you don't share ideas and solutions to their problems, what should I?
Basically, if you don't consult for them during the call. So like, how, you know, Alan always says like, how do you tell them the what, not the how, that
Yeah.
sort of, that's what I think Dan's asking you to expound upon.
Oh, I do share ideas. I don't give advice initially because I don't know enough to give good advice. That doesn't mean I don't have advice in my head. I mean, one of my challenges is I have to restrain my urge to say to people, fire him, like right now, like this afternoon, because I'm a very impatient person. But I do talk to them. I share ideas, I share experiences, and I use stories from my own practice, you know, and I'll say something like, you know, I'm not positive this is relevant to you. I need to know more, but I'm thinking this might be helpful for you to hear. And then I'll share a story about some other situation. You know, 50% of my story is true and 50% I'm making up on the fly, but I'm trying to show them that I can shine a light on their thinking and I can help them see things differently and help them get unstuck. But I'm not giving away the farm, and I don't give a lot of really specific advice. And if they ask me, the question I get asked a lot is, what do you think is wrong with that person? Which, you know, what they want is a diagnosis. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Now I might know. I might be thinking, but I'm hearing about a person from another person. So it's sort of, it's very seductive to hear that siren call of give advice. And there's a guy, Michael Bungay Stainer, who wrote a book called The Advice Trap or The Advice Habit or something like that. Michael's a terrific guy. And his book is quite good. And I recommend it for those of us that have to rein in our desire to give advice.
Great. So we're going to let you go ahead, and we've got a few minutes left. So kind of give us your concluding thoughts and something you want to leave with us.
Yeah, I think one of the questions made me think about the tendency to rush through things. It's a weird dichotomy. There's a tendency to rush through the tactics of closing a sale or a project. You know, people write letters of agreement prematurely. I think it's worth investing in yourself in whatever way works for you to get really good at the conversation that precedes the letter of agreement being written, and then further to get really good at writing letters of agreement. I usually spend about 90 minutes writing mine. Then I put them away and I read them a couple hours later because I always see stuff that's wrong with it, you know, before I send it. And then there's also this curious opposite thing where consultants ruminate about things like their value proposition or their logo. I mean, who cares? Make a logo. I don't care. Change it. I changed mine. My first one was kind of dopey and basic, and so I changed it. I like it better now. I'll probably change it again. But also, in addition to the ruminating, I see people wasting time doing things that are not getting them what they say their objective is. So a few years ago, I was with someone. I'm trying not to let you all know who this person is because you might know this person. But we were together and talking about our businesses, and he asked me, he said, "How come you make so much more money than I do?" And I said, because we were very disclosing about our businesses. And I said, "Because I'm focused on it." And he's like, "Well, what am I focused on?" I said, "You're focused on having lunches and coffee with people and posting on Twitter." Like, I don't know. And so I'm deciding how I'm going to use my time based on, is that going to get me closer to my goal or not? Is it going to build a relationship with an important person? Is it going to advance a discussion that might lead to work? I don't know. And so I sometimes see people like being in these affinity groups. You know, I'm in this community and that community, and they're really busy and they're very involved and they're posting on social media like crazy, but they're not meeting with potential buyers. And I think it's just an interesting dichotomy to me that at one point in time, we sort of either slow down or do the wrong things. And at another, we hurry up and do something in a suboptimal way. But that's why if you invest in your own development, you can do extremely well, because that process can help you learn how to do things in a better way. So that's great. The other thing I wanted to say is sometimes I get messages or comments from people and they say, "I want to talk to you. I want to know how you got where you are." And my first thought is, well, I'm not sure where you think I am, but I get what they mean. They're sort of like, "You've been doing this longer than me. I know you're successful." I started saying that out loud a few years ago. I sort of was like this for a while. I don't know why, something about bragging. And what I want to reassure you all is anyone you see that's successful, Lisa, Linda, me, Colleen Francis, if you know Colleen, we've all had times when we were wondering what the hell we were doing. You know, we've wondered if we were doing the right thing. We wondered if we should shift. That what you see when you see somebody who you think is doing well is you see them at that point in time. If you're earlier in your career, or if you're trying to, put a jetpack on your career, even if you're doing well, you might decide, "I'm doing well, but I want to do a lot better. So, I need some jet fuel." I want to encourage you to look for the little signs that what you're doing is working, not just the big signs. I think it's very disheartening if you go a few months without a big sale, when maybe things are happening that are what Dorie Clark calls raindrops. In her book, The Long Game, she talks about raindrops and noticing that, I've been doing that, I've been writing content and beating my head against a wall, but the little things that are happening that say you're on the right path can be very sustaining and help you be resilient when you're waiting for your ship to come in. And I think it's something most of us aren't really great at doing. One of the ways to get better at doing that is to have colleagues and friends and a supportive family that asks you to share more about what you're doing. And then, if they love you and want you to do well, they're going to point out the raindrops for you. And then you can go, oh yeah, I didn't really see that. I think it's really important. I think a community like this one is absolutely critical. It keeps us from, over dramatizing what happens, like the mistake in my book. I got to tell you, not a single person has ever noticed the mistake. I noticed it. Yeah. And I was devastated. I thought I was going to, it was terrible anyway. And some of you know Linda Henman, she has a very wicked sense of humor. She's like, don't worry, there's more. She's right. There's always mistakes in books. So I wish you all successful career. This has been fun. And we have 2 minutes if anybody has another question.
Well, thank you, Constance. This was great. I think one of the key things that I heard that you didn't say in so many words is even at this point in your career, you're still growing and you're still looking for support and you're still getting coached. I mean, sometimes I hear people say, well, I'm too good to be coached. But, the Olympic athletes need coaches and, professional athletes need coaches and musicians need coaches. So we all need to grow.
Right. I mean, you go to piano camp every year.
Yep.
And you're a darn good pianist. I mean, it's you're absolutely right about that. That ongoing learning is not just necessary, but it makes what we do fun. Like I'm just absolutely not interested in where I am. In fact, some of the consultants that I know that have really never done well despite years of trying are the ones that I hear arguing with advice from people who are ahead of them on the path or have had more success. And they ask a question and the person answers, and then they tell them why that advice won't work. Okay, that's your choice, but it gets tiresome hearing the same question.
Yes. So thank you so much. Before we leave, I want to just remind people, we have a lot of good stuff coming up. Our supply chain special interest group has a webinar open to anybody interested in supply chain, whether with WIC or not. And that's tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific. It's made for West Coast and Pacific Rim perspective. We did have one earlier that was on the East Coast and Europe perspective. And then March is really jam-packed. March 2nd, we have one of our wind down meetings, which is kind of our get-together networking events. On March 17th, we have the last webinar in this series, You Want to Be a Consultant, where Phil Simsich is going to talk to us about how you set profitable fees and talk about having a good sense of humor. Phil has a great Canadian sense of humor. And then Russell Trahan on March 30th, this is a redo of a workshop. Russell had a problem and had to reschedule. It's our practicum webinar about how you cut the crop and harvest publicity you can use. So put those on your calendar. If you can't make it, they will all be in the archives. And again, we want to thank you so much for being here and taking the time to share all this with us.
Yeah,
absolutely. It was great, Constance.
Yeah,
great. It was a blast. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Take care.
Great to have questions in real time.
Absolutely.